Hello everybody, Nick the Tiro here. Let's talk about basic Python variables. And we're really going to concentrate in this video on the primary ones of concern for this week's material, and that is string variable, integer variable, and a floating variable. A string variable is what it sounds. You put strings into it. It's treated differently by the interpreter. A integer is a whole number. We use integers for counting. If there's 23 students in a class, there's 5 cars in a parking lot, something that is counted, there's a whole number. The running joke, there's no such thing as 2.4 students in the classroom. There's 2 students in the classroom. And then finally, float. Float is a number that has a whole number, or that whole number may be 0, but it has some kind of fraction associated, 2.5, 2 and 1/3. So again, we have string, integer, and float. And let's do some demonstrations on those particular integers. As I mentioned in previous videos, we're going to use standard geometric shapes. All right, so let's start with a simple one. Let's start with a rectangle, and let's find the area of a rectangle. Now, let's get a little creative. Let's go up to my screen, and I'm in the Python shell, which allows me to type Python commands directly into the computer. It doesn't save those commands. It's not a program. I will do demonstrations in Replit, and I'll do demonstrations in Zybooks. But the Python shell affords me the ability to demonstrate some basic Python variables. We'll start with a string, and we're going to call a string shape is equal to rectangle. And I'll hit enter. Now, it doesn't look like anything happened there, but something did happen there. Basically, the literal rectangle was put inside the variable shape. Now, Python is a little different than other programming languages. Other programming languages, for example, Java, require you to initialize or create the variables before you use them. Python doesn't have that restriction. That's both good and bad. So you have to be a little careful about your variables and where you're putting them throughout your program. With a Java, you know where your variables are because you have to initialize them. You have to create them before you even start. Python, I just create away. Now, that is a string variable. Shape is a string variable. There's things I can do, but let's prove it's a shape variable. There's a function in Python called type. And if I just go type shape, that tells me that shape is a string variable. There's things I can do with a string variable. That's for other videos or other discussions. But basically, it puts something inside the string. Now, I can create longer string variables. I could do some concatenation, but that's for another variable, another video at another time. Let's talk about the integer. Like I said before, integers are whole numbers. We use them to count things. Cars in a parking lot, students in a classroom, the side of a dice, the number of diamonds on a card of a playing deck, the number of cards in a playing deck. Those are all whole numbers. If we're going to do the area of a rectangle is basically length times width. So let's create a variable called length, and we're going to give it a size of 4. It could be 4 inches, 4 centimeters, whatever. It's 4 of something. And the width is going to be 2. Now, let's take a look at those variables real quickly. Let's verify that they are integers, and I'll do a type length. It returns, that's an integer. Type width, and that's an integer. Now, as you're programming, you don't have to use the type function. I use it just for demonstration purposes. I use it to show that what I'm telling you, that I'm putting a whole number into the variable, and that variable is now an integer. And same thing for the shape. I put the word rectangle inside the shape. Let's see if those variables populated with information. Now, in the Python terminal, all I got to do is type those variables. So if I type shape, it says, okay, shape has the value of rectangle in it. Length has a value of 4 in it. Width has a value of a 2 in it. Now, let's do some basic math. I'm going to say area is equal to length star times width. All right, so it's going to multiply length times width and put it in the variable area. And it sure did. Now let's make sure on that. We'll type area again, and there's the number 8, length times width. Let's see what type of variable area is. And it's still an integer. Let's raise the level of complexity just a little bit. So hold on one second. All right, so I start with a clean screen. Let's raise the level of complexity just a little bit, and let's deal with a float. A float is a number that has some kind of fraction to it. Now that fraction could be something like 2.0. You know, 0 is not really a fraction, but 2.0, 2.1, it's a number that has some kind of a decimal point associated with it. Let's do a simple math equation with finding the area of a triangle. The area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So we're going to start the same thing. We're going to create a variable called shape. This one we'll call triangle. And we'll double check that. Yep, it's a triangle. If we double check it here, okay, it's a string. And we haven't really done anything with strings yet. I'm going to say base is equal to, now I'm going to be a little tricky here. Because it's 1/2 base times height, I'm going to make everything a float value. So I'm going to have a decimal point with my number. So the base, I'm going to say the base is 10.0, right? And again, I'll say base, right? It's 10.0. I'll say type, base. We see that it's a float now because it has that decimal point. Now I'm going to say height is equal to, we'll say 5.1. We'll do the same thing here. And me showing the type, you don't have to do that. I'm just, again, this is for demonstration purposes. If I say height, you can see that's 5.1. And if I say type, spell it correctly, and we see that it's a float. Now let's do the calculation of the area of a triangle. The area of a triangle, again, is 1/2 base times height. So I'll type area is equal to, I'll make it a little bit long. I'll use some parentheses. I will say open paren 1.0, because I'm doing everything in floats right now, divided by 2.0. Could I have done a 0.5? Absolutely. And I'll demonstrate that, but I'm going to do it the long way a little bit. So 1/2 times base times height, right? And when I run it, let's see what the value is. And let's see what the, obviously you're going to know it's going to be a float. And it's a float. So we really haven't done anything with strings. We'll cover that more a little bit in the input and the output. Cover a lot more in the input and output. But I'm doing some basic math. Let me clear my screen again. Hold on one second. All right. Now, let me do the exact same thing, or the functions. I'll speed it up a little bit so you don't have to sit through the explanation. But everything I've done on this terminal goes away once I'm done with the terminal. Let's actually write it inside a program. Let's do the exact same thing we did inside the Python terminal, but let's actually write it in some code into a file that we could run. So like I said, inside the terminal, the stuff goes away once I'm done with it. I want to keep this permanent. So the first thing I'm going to do is very similar to what I did in the terminal. I'm going to create a variable called shape, and I'm going to put triangle inside that variable. And then because it's not going to be instantaneous like we saw inside the terminal, I'm going to say print the shape. So print that variable. And I'm going to say base is equal to 4.1, because I'm going to make it a float. And I'm going to say height is equal to 5.1, because it's a float. And then the area is going to be 1/2 times base times height. So 1/2 base times height stretches out there. Again, could I have used 0.5? And yes, I could. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep this line. I'm going to print the area. But for just demonstration purposes, I'll say there's many ways we can do it. I'm going to say area is equal to 0.5 star base star or multiply height. And again, I'll print area again. Now, this time I need to run the program. Give it a second, and it printed out the shape, and it printed out the float value of the area of that triangle. Let's do this one more time. I'm going to do the magic of cut and paste here to save some time. Let's do this inside the Python textbook, inside the Python IDE. Okay, so I'm inside the Python IDE, and let's save some time here. Let me, because I'm a bad typer and stuff like that, let me do just a quick cut and paste from the REPL sandbox to the Python sandbox. All right, I already copied and I pasted, but let's go through this again. Shape is equal to triangle, print out the shape. Base is equal to 4.1, height is equal to 5.1, area is equal to 1/2 base times height, print the area, area is equal to 0.5 times base times height, print out the area. Now, if I go down here and I run this program, you can see that the output is the same value that we got it. So we did a quick demonstration on what a string is, what a integer is, and what a float is. In other videos, we'll keep expanding upon this knowledge. So that being said, let's go learn something.